we've kind of developed this false kind of impression that this is all about women and it's this zero-sum game. People think she wins, I lose, which is absolutely not the case. With gender equality, everyone wins. Everyone wins.
Welcome, Steph. It's such a great pleasure to have you with me today in conversation for the Remarkable Women Powerful Stories series.
And it's just so wonderful to be here.
I wonder, can we begin our conversation today with some of your early life growing up and I guess some of those experiences that might have taken you to where you are today?
I'm Australian, having lived here for 31 years, but I actually grew up in Alaska, in Fairbanks, Alaska. And I guess my childhood felt quite usual to me, but to many, particularly in this side of the world, it was a bit unusual. So I grew up in 40 degrees below zero, where you really had to have a community to support you. And it was the days before we had mobile phones. So it would mean that if you were driving home at 40 below and your car broke down, you were in big trouble. So you had to be able to make sure that you could trust the person who stopped to pick you up. My father was a criminologist and he worked at the university, but he did his research in tribal courts. And so he worked with our Indigenous population. And to get around, he had a little float plane. So we had to go with him to these really remote communities. And it was this really powerful experience early on of different cultures, of remote communities, of some of the incredible challenges. Alaska has one of the highest rates of violence against women in the United States. It's 6 times the rate of the rest of the United States, and of violence against children. So I very much had violence in my community growing up, but I very much also had community. And again, that experience of moving around this remote territory with some pretty incredible conditions, including weather. So I think by the time I looked at where I wanted to go with my career, I was incredibly interested in different cultures. I was incredibly interested in humanity. My dad being a criminologist, I was incredibly interested in justice. And of course, then growing up with that violence on my doorstep, that was something I have from a very young age been aware of how that is just a major barrier to any person who is experiencing that violence, and how it can affect children, how it can affect a community, how it can affect business, how it can affect a nation even. So I've been strongly committed to addressing violence against women and girls from a very early age.
It's interesting how when we're very young, experiences generally take us at some time in our life down a pathway that's somewhat related. It mightn't be at the beginning, but somewhere down the pathway. So how did you then, if I might ask this question, how did you then find yourself in Australia?
Growing up in Alaska, there's some Alaskans leave and never come back, and some stay and never leave. My sister's still up there, has had a wonderful life as an Alaskan woman. My parents are still alive, but I went to California for my undergraduate degree, and then was lucky enough to get a scholarship to go to Cambridge University in the UK to do a master's, and then a subsequent scholarship to do a PhD at Columbia in New York. I got waylaid a bit. I went to Cambridge. I studied, I like to say, the theory and the practice of international relations. I met this Australian man and had a whirlwind romance. 11 months later, I found myself married, and we decided we wanted to be together, and to do so, we had to get married, because if I was going to come back to Australia, he was in the military, so there wasn't an option for him coming to the States. I threw in the towel on a 5-year fellowship for a PhD at Columbia. I mean, my daughter looks at me and said, "Mum, what kind of feminist are you?" Um, I was in love, and so I was young, 25. So I found myself in Perth, Western Australia on a Sunday with this husband who I'd met as a student who puts on this green uniform and goes to work. And that was the beginning of my life in Australia 31 years ago. And I'm now a very
Mm.
proud Australian, two children later, and a career with the Australian government, as well as other
Mm.
sectors in Australia and the region. So it's been a wonderful 31 years.
I wonder if you can unpack for me just a little bit about a few of those steps from those days of, being arriving here in Perth with degrees under your belt, and then finding yourself where you are today as the ambassador for gender equality here in Australia.
I have to say, and now that I am in this ambassadorial role, I reflect on this a lot, and I reflect a lot on the care burden on women and what that means. So I have a husband in the military. He's not just in the regular army, he's in the SAS. So he was, never home. I arrived and I had our first child when I was 27, our daughter Emily, and we were in Perth, and then I got a job with the Australian Red Cross as the International Humanitarian Law Coordinator. He then got posted to Queenscliff, where Staff College was, and I had to move again. Had a second child, our son Ben was born. And then he got posted to Canberra. So I packed up the bags, went to Canberra, had these two children to care for. And so I was keen to work, and I did get a dream job with the then AusAid, the Australian government's development program. So I started this incredible job, and I really loved it. And then my husband got a posting order, as you do in the military, and he was off to Townsville. And that was the stage we had to sit down and say, am I going to follow a traditional path, and follow him and take care of the children and support his career, which, many do. But my career was really important to me. And I realized there was a lot of compromise I was going to have to make, and my family was going to have to make if I was going to have the career that I wanted. So we discussed it as a family, and we decided that I would look for a job, a posting in a country where it would be really easy for me to come and see him on long weekends, and he could fly up and see us. And so I looked at the map, and of course, I'm still relatively new to Australia and the region. I look at the map, and that closest country to Townsville was Papua New Guinea. So I literally applied for posting to PNG. I was successful, and then packed up my bags with my two little children and went to PNG, and that started this wonderful career in Papua New Guinea. I mean, I fell in love with PNG, I fell in love with the Pacific, but also it was tough. I was a single parent for many years, and my career at each point, if I wanted to progress with a husband in the military, with the burden, I have to say, of the care responsibility, because my husband Angus, he traveled frequently. He was, worked long hours. He wasn't reliable in the sense of where he would be at any one time, because he could be, tasked to pop off, anywhere at any time. So I really had to take that care responsibility, as many women do. We know that women do have unequal care burdens, which can affect careers. So we had to make some choices along the way, which meant that my husband and I, who he eventually in that military career ended up as our chief of defense force, but we had to make some tough decisions, and I got a posting to then, after Papua New Guinea, I came back and then was offered this incredible role running our bilateral programs with Fiji and Tuvalu in our Pacific Regional in Fiji. And
Mm.
so again, we made this decision. My parents came out and helped me there, and then came back for a few years in Canberra, and then got this other incredible offer to move back to PNG to run our entire development cooperation program as the head of that. And so again, big family discussion and on and on. So at each stage, it's been one of sacrifice for also career development. And, I've had a fantastic career. My children have probably had a rather unusual childhood. My husband and I are still married and happy and love each other, after 31 years of marriage, but it hasn't been a traditional life. And there's been a lot of, I've had to give up to also maintain a career. But I feel very fortunate to have a partner who's been so supportive of that as well.
And it's a two-way street of support, though, isn't it? Where you've supported him in his career as well,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so you've both had careers. Whether yours is, when we look at your career today, it's successful and will continue to be, as will his. So it's that partnership. Are you saying there it's about the partnership then that has
No.
caused that to happen? What is it?
So it's the partnership, yes. I think, having a partner who accepted he wasn't going to be able to, have that day in and day out with his family. That's not easy. But that said too, I mean, it was really interesting because for me, there was no choice. The kids would come with me. Like, I mean, because of his career, but also because of my, I guess, feelings as a mother. I wanted to be with my children. So that was never an option. But that said, even if I had decided the kids would stay with Angus, society wasn't ready for that. And even when I made the choice to go to PNG without him, I was terribly judged. People were saying, "What are you doing?" I had family members judging me. There were bets at the barbecue that my marriage wouldn't last. People were talking about me. It wasn't a comfortable decision socially or culturally, because there is, and there remains to be, there's this view that women take care, men take charge. And when those roles shift, there's a lot of criticism. And so I had made that choice, and I'm comfortable with that choice, but I've seen it go the other way where women get disproportionately a lot of judgment. We still have those expectations. And as a result, women still have around the world significantly greater care burden than men. Even women that are earning more money will have more of a care responsibility and burden than men. And it does affect careers, across all sectors and all areas. It affects incomes, it affects our ability to earn income and then super, so that we have safety and retirement. Women in Australia are the fastest growing cohort of poverty. Women over 50 are the fastest growing cohort of poverty and homelessness in our country because of that gap in careers with the care responsibilities. So, I think I lived that in a way of making decisions that were a bit different, but I also experienced that judgment, the guilt. I mean, my goodness, did I have guilt thinking, what am I doing? My kids aren't having that steady kind of family life. There was a lot of guilt involved as well. So it wasn't easy. And sometimes I think if I had to do it all over again, would I make the same decisions? I think so, but not sure. I think, golly, I see kind of although, with the husband in the military, we're moving all around anyway, but it is what it is.
Yeah, so
I'll back you up for it.
It's really interesting, and I find it, from my perspective, Steph, disappointing, isn't it, that in that approximately 20-year time from when you were making those decisions yourself and as a family, the women still making those decisions. And I know in the work I do with women, I had a conversation yesterday all about the guilt.
Yeah.
The guilt of this, the guilt of disappointment, the guilt of not doing the right thing by children, whatever the right thing might be to do.
But
And
this is okay. Yeah,
it's really interesting, isn't it?
It's so interesting. Sorry to interrupt, but this really gets me going, because there are these norms that a perfect mother is home with her children, 24 hours. And there's this view that a perfect worker is the first in and the last to leave. Like, we still kind of expect all that. And so society is constantly judging us. There she goes again to pick the kids. Oh, she has, another sick day off because her kid's sick, whatever. We don't judge men the same way, I don't think. But we're constantly holding ourselves, to account of that. I'm not home enough. I'm not there for my kids. I'm not, I missed this. I haven't done that. Oh, I'm not at work enough. I haven't, I'm not there to do X, Y, and Z. I don't feel so. We're constantly feeling torn, and we're constantly feeling guilty. And it's back to those norms of what women do and what men do. And we're constantly judging ourselves. Yeah.
And so perhaps we'll follow that thread of the norms, because I know a lot of your beliefs well, I think I know that a lot of your beliefs are coming off those norms or those stereotypes, but probably more the norms of society, of how perhaps all society or a lot of society believes these things about women. For example, you mentioned to me the other day that, women do this sort of work, men do this sort of work. And we think that we've overcome a lot of those barriers about women can't go into STEM, or it's hard for women to get into STEM, but it's equally difficult for men to go to early childhood teaching, for example. So can you just expand more on your views of that and how that is part of your work, perhaps in your ambassadorial work?
Yeah. So those kind of norms, or what we expect of women because they're women and what we expect men, one of the things I've found, and now I've traveled to quite a few countries in this role, they're universal. Every country has them in some way. And what happens is from little tiny babies, we have girls and we have boys, and there's been some research on this, which is fascinating. We tend to hold little girls closer. We tend to jiggle little boys a bit more. Once they get to the toddler stage, little boy falls off the play gym. It's don't be such a sissy, don't be a crybaby. Little girls come here, don't get dirty. Let's brush you off, sit nicely. They get into school, our expectations, little girls will play nice, little boys, rough and ready is just being a boy. You get into, then you move through into those teenage years. The girls are babysitting, the boys are, my world was shoveling snow, so it's that kind of thing. And so we get into, well, first of all, along the way, because of that, little boys, are encouraged more to take risk. Little girls are encouraged to, sit nice. So when there's been that fascinating research on STEM where boys will take more risk in terms of math, for example, I think you were a former math teacher, but girls will give up more quickly because we're socialized to risk different. But you get into the workforce, and again, men take charge, men are aggressive, men close deals, men lead in, right? Women take care, we're emotional, we might cry occasionally, that. And so those are the norms. We're not aggressive, we don't lean in, and we expect that. And so if I have Bob and I have Sue, right? And Bob, he's a leader. He takes charge. He can be aggressive. He can get cranky sometimes. There we have Bob. You have Sue. She makes sure everyone's happy. She takes care. She can be a bit emotional. Well, we trust them. But if you change those adjectives and, Sue kind of leans in, she takes charge, she's aggressive, and Bob takes care and he cries occasionally. We're not socialized to trust that. And ergo, it becomes this unconscious bias against. I can't tell you how many women have said to me, and I've heard it myself in performance reviews, you're just a little too aggressive, right? Or when we look at pay rises, well, he might need it because he might need it because he has a family, she probably doesn't need it as much. Like all of these unconscious. I was on a plane the other day. I caught myself doing this. I'm on an airplane, and we take off, and there's all female pilots, and I thought, hooray, this is great. We have all female pilots. And we get into this terrible turbulence, and I just, oh my God, I hope they can fly the plane. I hope that, and I thought, I landed, what was I doing? Of course they can fly this plane, because, I'm socialized to think in that kind of turbulent process, I want a man to take charge. That was how I was socialized. Of course, they're completely capable of flying the plane through, turbulence, maybe even better so. But it's just that I was socialized. I had to really catch myself on that and give myself a talking to once we landed. Like, what was I doing?
So that's again a beautiful example of the stereotyping, isn't it? That we're conditioned, and it's just taught to us from an early age. And I'm a slightly different generation to yourself, Steph, and certainly not was taught to me. And
Yeah.
clearly part of your upbringing, and we've tried not to have that in the upbringing of the daughters and sons of the generation that you're bringing up, where I'm assuming your children are somewhere in their 20s. We're bringing up or have brought up generations of young people in that next generation beyond the Gen X, Gen Y and beyond. But somehow those stereotypes are still there, and it's pushed by media and society and everything else potentially. Very, very interesting. So can I ask, when we talked a little while ago, we talked about your work in Papua New Guinea, which was around family violence, sexual violence at the heart, with a lot of other things. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that, and then how that has, I guess, segues into the work you're doing in the advocacy and the work that you do now.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. So I've had the privilege of working in PNG for a lot of my career. I first went up there in 2000, so over 25 years ago. And, you know, well, of course, throughout the world, we have problems with violence. There's not one country in this world that does not have a significant challenge with violence against women, including our own country, where, you know, we have one woman that is murdered every 10 days in this country by an intimate partner, and, you know, significant challenges with those who are experiencing on a day-to-day basis as well. So no country in this world. In Papua New Guinea, the prevalence of violence against women is particularly high, and that early on became a factor in my role of trying to lead a team, for example, where I would have, you know, let me just tell you one story. I was working with this incredible team, and I had this incredible woman who I've been mentoring and supporting, and, you know, really keen to see her move into a higher position. And one day she didn't come to work, she didn't call, so I thought, I hope she's okay. The next day she didn't come to work. The next day, a month later, you know, I'm trying to get hold of her, find out what's going on, saying, listen, you're gonna lose your job, like, what's going on? Finally, she said she would meet me, and in talking about this, I do want to say, if you're listening at the moment, and this can, you know,
Yep.
bring up
Trigger.
difficult trigger. So please, you know, put your self-care hat on and take care of yourself through this. But so I'm going to talk about some challenging things in this space, just to give people a bit of heads up on that. So anyway, so she asked if she could meet me in a private location. So I went into a hotel in the back of the bar area, the restaurant area, and sat down. And she basically had been really disfigured by her partner, who had kind of sliced up with a bush knife, actually. And he had told her, you know, you're a horrible person. You work for an organization that is really supportive of women's rights. They're just going to think you're weak and terrible, that you know, and you're incompetent. So not only had he physically abused her, but emotionally. And so she was too frightened to come back to work. She didn't think work was a safe space for her to come and talk about these issues. I was horrified that she didn't think she could have called me on day one and said, I need your support. So that was a real eye-opener for me on a few ways. One, just, you know, needing that safe environment. Two, the fact I was about to lose one of my most, you know, incredible employees because of violence, and then what violence was doing to women in the workforce. I also found that when I would promote women, that put them at high risk of violence. Now, of course, I'm still going to promote them, but ensuring that they were prepared for that risk period, and that they had safety plans, and they understood when you start to get more income, when there might be a jealousy factor, you know, whatever, this could put you at higher risk. Are you aware of that? You know, do you need a safety plan? We need to talk about it. So those sorts of things of me trying to manage a team in an environment where we had very high prevalence of violence became something as a leader. Then, of course, everywhere I would go, I would see it. I was then in the health sector for many years. I was chair of the board of Southern Highlands Provincial Health Authority in Papua New Guinea, and I would see very clearly how this violence was impacting the health sector. The majority of cases we had come in was somehow linked to this violence. When we did our education programs, I was seeing how this was affecting children and their development. You know, it just, there was not the law of justice, you know, community had this disproportionate burden. There was not a single part of society that was left untouched. And indeed, as a development professional, looking at achieving our development goals, you know, well, first of all, you're never going to achieve your development goals if you ignore the potential of 50% of the population, and you don't tap into 100% of the talent of your population. But in order, in particularly those really, really high prevalence violence situations, if it's such a cross-cutting issue to all aspects of development. If you don't address it, again, you're not going to get very far. So I very early on realized that I had to address violence against women and girls for development outcomes, for business outcomes, etc.
So it was another plank in building your, I guess, foundation for what you're continuing to do today.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could spend a little bit of time talking about the working together. You talked about, we have to have 100% of the population working together at 100% represented. So then that takes us down the path of the place of women and girls and men and boys, and working together around matters of gender equality, gender-based violence, any of the matters in society, but in this particular case. So I know you've got some very clear and strong views about how that has to happen by bringing everyone together. It's not just women's work or men's work.
So I'm ambassador for gender equality, and I like to define gender equality like this. Every single person has every single opportunity to meet their full potential, regardless of their gender. And when we shine the light on any one sector or issue, we often find that women and girls have greater barriers to reaching their full potential than men and boys. We just talked about the disproportional burden of violence or care, for example. So we need to lift those barriers, but not always. Let's shine the light on mental health, for example, and the same social norms we were talking about before. Man up, real men don't cry, don't be such a sissy, that sort of thing means that in many countries, there's a great barrier to men because of these norms, gender norms, in accessing help and support. So in doing that, we see in many countries the prevalence of suicide amongst men can be much higher than women, for example. And so that's a barrier we need to lift. If you look at what's happening in many countries to young boys in year 12, for example, or in high school where they're falling behind, that's a barrier we need to lift. So gender equality is about lifting barriers for everyone, depending on where those barriers exist. And we do find, as I said, in many cases we need to spend time and attention on women and girls because of those barriers, but not always. So I think that's really important to understand, because in some ways we've kind of developed this false kind of impression that this is all about women and it's this zero-sum game. People think she wins, I lose, which is absolutely not the case. With gender equality, everyone wins. Everyone wins. You just think about it. Families have income, families are happier, and children have better development. There's been so much fantastic research that when men are involved in that care, particularly in early years, their mental health is better. The children are much healthier, both mentally and physically. They grow up to be much happier adults. So there's so many benefits when you look at it in terms of business. We know the statistics. If we lifted the barriers for women and men, and we were participating equally in the economy, we would, in Australia alone, we've calculated that to be $128 billion a year to our GDP. Globally, it's up to 28 trillion if we did that well. So on and on, you come at every single level of society that case. It benefits everyone. But something's happening with our young men, and you mentioned before that next generation. In many cases with that next generation, these young men are becoming less tolerant of gender equality because they feel they've been left behind or pushed out or made to blame. A lot of young men are finding that their lives online, for example, are more satisfying than their lives offline. They're feeling that they don't have a place. They're feeling that no one understands them. They're feeling pushed out of opportunities. And this is really high risk for them to be pulled in, for example, in some of these misogynistic online groups. So we have to pay attention to everyone, and we have to ensure that this is a win-win situation. We're never going to have equality for everyone, and we're never going to address some of the tricky issues like violence unless we do that.
So you have a powerful voice through your role and through where you work and the exposure that you have I guess there's a big audience of women for these podcasts that I host. What is it that an individual woman or girl can do to, I guess, embrace the equality. And I recently had a conversation with another woman about outrage versus influence. You know, when is there a time for outrage and when is there a time for just influence and moving forward? But I wonder what it is an individual or small groups can do. And I know when we talked recently, we talked a lot about risk-taking confidence, and you've mentioned it already earlier today. So I'll
Yeah.
leave that with you to pick up a thread there.
Uh, okay, so I think it's both individuals and groups. It's know your worth. Like again, let me just give you one example. I went for a run recently in Melbourne. I was heading out, and I asked one of my male colleagues. I said, I'm wanting to go for a run. It's not quite light. Where would you suggest I go? I was staying around South Bank in Melbourne, if you know Melbourne. He said, oh, you just go this way and get to the tan and around. It's a great run. He said, I run it every day and it's perfectly safe. Nothing's ever happened and you'll be fine. So out I go. I'm running past the casino and these three men are coming out drunk, obnoxious. They start catcalling me. They start chasing me a bit. I was quite frightened, by myself, three drunk men. I ran back to the hotel and I found him later and I said, you know what? That was safe for you every day in your lived experience, and it probably always will be. But in my lived experience, it was not safe for me. And therefore, even though you had perfectly great intentions of keeping me safe, you just, with your lived experience, can't do it. And ergo, if you are the one at the table, if you are the one at parliament or in, business making decisions for an entire population, you're not going to get it right because you don't have that lived experience. So women across every single sector should know the value that they bring. We need women at the table. So know that and be confident about it. But confidence is hard. I was thinking today, I still get imposter syndrome. I'm well into my career towards the end of it. I still think, what am I doing at this table? Do I belong here? I still have that voice in my head. After all of these years, I'm better at it now, but I still have it. And again, it's back to that story we said before. We are socialized not to be confident. We are socialized to doubt ourselves. We are socialized to feel guilty. And so I think it's understanding you belong at the table. And when you're not feeling confident, realize that, if you do feel confident, fantastic, that's great. But if you're lacking that confidence or you're worried, and you see it all the time, you got the job description and women feel they have to meet 100% of the criteria, and it's like, all of that. Know your worth. If you're not feeling confident, just, find a way to talk to someone about that, find a way to move through it. It's a normal feeling. We all have it. We need you. And so I would start with that. We need you, we need your voice. I have found in my own experience between that advocacy and outrage, influencing outrage, I've always found it's better to be in the tent influencing than outside the tent yelling to be let in. I find that, it might feel better for a while doing that. You might get some short-term gains, but the longer-term gains is when you can work in this environmental win-win. And when we just have to be careful along every step that we're not creating pushback. It's for me, every step of the way, it's looking at where I can find champions, um, where I can have practical conversations with evidence of why gender equality is so essential for everyone and everything from addressing climate change. We cannot address climate change if we do not have gender equality. You just can't do it. Back to that lived experience that women bring to the table, the fact that they're disproportionately affected, and the fact if we don't tap into 100% of our brain power, 100% of our talent, or this most difficult, challenging of issues for the planet, we ain't going to do it. And you can apply that across, every single area. So we need women at the table. Confidence is an issue because it's been socialized. The other thing I would say that, I do think confidence sometimes drives people say to me, what about women? They're so mean to other women. I say, first of all, there's a special place in hell for them, but at the same time, that I have some empathy because it's a confidence issue. in my experience, when women are being particularly challenging to other women, it's a confidence issue often. And so we need to work together as women. We are powerful as women. If we can remove those barriers and come together, we can move mountains. And so finding ways to do that is just so incredibly important.
And if we can uplift another woman every single day,
Yes.
it doesn't have to be 100 people at a time. It can be one person at a time. We uplift a woman to build their confidence, to have not only get to the table, but to claim their space and to have their voice at the table matters, and to know that if their opinions are shot down, they just find another way to bring that opinion up and to hold their ground. And that's tough, and it's taken a lot of us a lifetime to learn that, Steph.
Yeah.
So
and it happens all the time. Still, you say something,
it does.
The man says the same thing about phones that are, everyone has it happens all the time. And I'm speaking in audiences and I share that every woman's nodding her head, no matter which country I'm in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So as we lead to a close very shortly, I want to ask two more things of you. One is, what do you think your leadership gifts are that make you be able to do this? And I'll leave that with you, and I've got one to finish with.
Okay. For me, like there's all sorts of styles of leadership, and you can have the smartest person in the room. But if you can't inspire, motivate, listen and hear and understand, you're not going to get very far. So for me, I fundamentally believe in empathy. I fundamentally believe in deep listening and understanding where people are at any one point in time. I fundamentally believe that when you can come together with, a shared vision that importantly matches people's personal values with your corporate values, that's where you're going to move forward. So I've really, over my career, and through the school of hard knocks, I've got things wrong, I've learned from them, but I've really worked on developing that empathy, and just, leading with empathy, leading with love, leading with passion, and understanding, my values of respect, of trust, of honesty, of transparency, of, really delivering outcomes and not just spinning in circles for me is so important. Where I could bring those personal values and make sure they link with others on my team and that we've captured those in our corporate values. To me, that's been what's worked really, really well and in leading successful teams and delivering on some tricky outcomes.
So on a personal side, I know that you have a really inbuilt love of community, and you talked about that at the very beginning today, about your community in Alaska and how that was for you as a small person and in your growing up years. So how do you work within your local community nowadays?
So for me, community is just so incredibly important. I need to balance everything I do with what happens here at home. So I now do two things very actively. Where I can, I volunteer at our local palliative care facility. So Claire Holland's house, which I find really rewarding and inspirational. But I also am passionate about biodiversity and wildlife. So I'm a wildlife carer. I'm a wildlife rescuer. I volunteer on our 24 phone line, which I love because I get to speak to members of our community on a shared love for animals. So right now I have in my little hot box two sweet little baby possums, and I have a little microbat actually. And if you're interested in microbats, I'll be posting something on my LinkedIn pretty soon with my little sweet microbat that I rescued the other day, which I'm going to release pretty soon, which is really exciting. But I mean, our wildlife's so important. My little microbat, for example, he eats his body weight in insects every night with all of his little mates flying around. That saves our agriculture industry billions of dollars. And we're destroying our biodiversity, our wildlife. We are so harming ourselves. And so I love the fact when I re-release one of these animals, I'm really, contributing to our planet, really. And so it's just such a privilege for me to be able to work with our animals and learn from them and what they teach me every single day. And I have to say, there's nothing better if you've had a bit of a challenging day. And again, I work in some pretty challenging spaces. I deal with some pretty tough issues. I bear witness to some really sad stories. But when I come home and I have a little baby Joey kangaroo or possum or even a little bat, and I have that bottle in its mouth and I'm holding it against my chest, feeding it, and then I see it grow and develop. And we lose a few, and that's sad. But the fact that I've this love and this care for this little animal, my oxytocin levels are just sky high. It
And
is,
so brings you
it's
peace, joy, satisfaction,
it
any of
brings
those things
me
too.
joy, and I feel like I'm giving back to my planet, which to me is really important.
And we have so many animals around the world and in our own country, all those quintessential animals that other people from other countries want to see and value are
Mm.
so much at risk
Yeah,
from climate
so
and
much
man
so
and
much
human
risk.
intervention.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So, a message for everyone today as we depart.
Ah, so I would just say, for the women out there, you are so important. As I said, we need you. And for the men out there, you're important. You are so important. We need you in this journey. And please know that gender equality, as I said, it is something that benefits all of us all of the time. And we're all better off for it. So I think my message is understand, how this is helping you and your community, and why we need to lift barriers for everyone. And why when we do that, it's not just the right thing to do, it is, but it's absolutely the smart thing to do as well.
Stephanie Copus Campbell, Zonta International, thanks you for your generosity of time today. And as always, my conversations with remarkable women sustain me as well. So thank you very much. Go well, go safely.
Thank you.